Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And no, this isn't John Ford. That was 80 weeks in a row, and now we're on to some Wes Anderson, which, thank God. But last week we started with his short film version of Bottle Rocket, and this week jumping into his feature debut of Bottle Rocket. And joining me is Matt from the Cool Epic, awesome podcast. Matt, thank you so much for coming on.
What's up, Shane? I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this film.
Absolutely. And this is where it really began for Wes Anderson. But before we get to that, we have three segments on the show. So we start with our coming attractions for this week of what is it, January 10th is this Friday.
Yep.
So a bit of a mix of some widening big releases from award season and then, January. So you never know what they're going to put out in January. And then we'll get to our feature film, obviously Bottle Rocket, and then some recommendations. So this week we do have a couple of widening releases in terms of Better Man and Hard Truths coming out, and also the unexpected sequel to January release Den of Thieves. Years later, Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, which I remember seeing the trailer for this. I'm like, they actually finally made a sequel to this movie.
I never
But
saw the original.
it's one of those like, would I have enjoyed this as much if it didn't release in January? Am I just like, wow, that actually was a pretty solid movie for coming out in movie dumping ground? But we'll actually get to that. But Matt, what film are you most excited about?
Well, you mentioned Better Man. I've been
Mhm.
hearing lots of great things about it. I love when there's sort of a unique take on a biopic,
Mhm.
like just the idea of having a CGI monkey as this guy who I'm not really familiar with him. Robbie, what's his last name?
I know the name Robbie Williams, and I
Robbie
know he's
Williams.
like a
Yeah.
pop star, but could I tell you any song of his? No. Um, so I
Yeah.
imagine I could after I watch this movie though. So
Yeah, no, but I like when they take swings like that, because biopics can get, pretentious sometimes and very samey. So
yep.
I like seeing something different. So it honestly weirdly reminds me of the Weird Al biopic, just because
So
it was something
yeah,
like just not stereotypical, they made up their own story for it, so it made it more interesting. But
Weird, Rocket Man, and now Better Man, I feel like are those music biopics recently that have taken a very outside the box kind of approach to it. Obviously, Weird did it by completely fabricating a whole entire biopic for Weird Al Yankovic. And I'm imagining this is going to be similar to Rocket Man, where it's like it just busts out into an actual musical in terms of this. And I've heard some from the few people that I know have seen it, really love this. And obviously it's creative. Like I remember seeing the trailer for the first time being like, what?
yeah.
And just thinking like, why would you do this? But we'll have to see. Um, as we're recording this, I'm going to be getting to see a last minute press screening 2 days before this actually comes out. So I'm excited to see how it turns out. Now, my film that I'm most excited about, and like I I use the term most excited in a different kind of way than you might expect. I did see Den of Thieves, and I'm like, wow, that was actually a really solid action thriller to be dumped in the middle of January. But in particular, I love Gerard Butler in it. Like a lot of the film was solid, but like he really stood out in it, and I'm a big fan of his. So when I found out that they were making a sequel to this, I'm like, really? Because like the film kind of sets up there could be more to this. I'm like, there's no way they're ever going to make a sequel to this. This doubt that this made enough money, and then here you go, like 6, 7 years later, coming out with this, and it's because like he was a cop, and um, you had O'Shea Jackson Jr. like he was a criminal,
Mhm.
and now they're teaming up for this big heist together, which is an interesting idea. I'm a big fan of Gerard Butler, and I really enjoyed this character. So looking forward to seeing how it turns out. If this turned out to be trash, I wouldn't be surprised. But we're going in and seeing it.
Yeah.
So
It seems like a dad film, honestly. That's
it
probably where
definitely
it's probably where it did well. It probably made money on like, you know, people
it's
buying it on
like
iTunes and stuff.
it's like a bunch of dads post holidays in January. It's like, ugh, I gotta get some like masculinity,
Yeah.
macho energy. It's like I'm gonna go out to the theater and watch Gerard Butler be like this very like morally gray detective. And that's exactly what that movie really is. It definitely has that vibe. What's crazy is this is like a 2 hour and 20 minute sequel. I'm like, what do you think you
Yeah.
are? Like, do you think this is like Terminator or Aliens? Like you're going big for your sequel here. So it this has a I doubt this has a high up end, but I imagine has a pretty low, potentially low end. So we'll see how it turns out. But I'm going to be seeing it Thursday night, the night before this actually comes
Yeah.
out. So we'll see how it goes. But also, Hard Truths is something that is getting a lot of buzz for the lead actress performance in it. But there's some other like actual new releases for January in the coming weeks that I'm excited about. This one's still like that holdover where they're like, we got to give like at least one more week for, Mufasa and Sonic to just demolish the box office. So,
Yeah.
which they're just going to keep rolling on until, Dog Man comes out at the end of the month.
We'll see how that
That
does.
I, I don't think very well,
I don't
but
know. I mean, I feel like
it is a kids movie.
the book isn't
So
even like popular enough to warrant a big release like this. I mean, it's for kids, obviously, so
they should
I
have
don't know.
just made a Captain Underpants sequel. Um, I would have been there for that. So I read those a lot growing up as a kid. And also the cherry on top was when they released a Weird Al original Captain Underpants theme song to it. I'm just like, they read me like a book.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that movie in a theater full of children and just being like, I probably enjoyed this more than these kids. So
Yeah.
there you go. January is an interesting beast. But those are our coming attractions. But let's get into our actual film for this week, which is 1996 Bottle Rocket, which directed by Wes Anderson. Some background. So this was indeed the feature debut of Wes Anderson and derived from his short film version of this that came out a few years before it that debuted and got some attention. And they're like, somebody wants to give you money to turn this into a feature film. It was shot on location in Texas. This is like you look at Wes Anderson and the kind of films that he makes, you probably wouldn't guess he's a Texan. It's not quite like that kind of vibe that you might expect, but
Yeah.
him and the Wilson brothers are all from Texas, outside of Austin and met together. Now, what's interesting is Scorsese called this one of his top 10 films of the 90s, which that's saying a lot because this is
It's high
Martin
praise.
Scorsese.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you could get like that rub from one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, that goes a long way for sure. And obviously, this launched the careers of Wes Anderson, Luke Wilson, and Owen Wilson. Um, I guess Matt, just a quick side note, like, what are your experiences with like the Wilson brothers and like movies and stuff?
I'm a big fan of both of them, honestly.
Mm.
Obviously Owen Wilson from Cars,
Yeah.
Lightning McQueen.
Ciao.
But yeah, I'm big fans of both of them. I mean, they don't really do like they do tend to stick more to stuff like this. I feel like Owen has probably branched out a little bit more, like beyond comedy, but I really like their comedic performances, honestly. So,
I, obviously Owen Wilson became a much bigger star. Obviously, between like Zoolander, um, Hansel, so hot right now, Hansel, and like it's silly, but like Shanghai Nights, Shanghai
mhm.
Noon with him and Jackie Chan and stuff like that. But Luke Wilson's always been he's less charismatic than Owen Wilson, has a lot smaller personality, but he does a very specific kind of role so well between like Idiocracy and like Skeleton Twins and stuff like that. And it made me happy seeing him popping up in a lot of like smaller kind of films where he's getting a chance to be like a lead. in certain things nowadays. But obviously, Wes Anderson's had quite the career that launched out of this movie, which I'll be diving into over the next couple of months.
Yeah.
And interesting bit of casting, they actually wanted Bill Murray to play the James Caan character in this, which makes 100% sense to me. And they were able to snag Bill Murray for the next film, Rushmore, which I'll be going over next week. But to give you all a little bit of synopsis, very short synopsis, very simple on IMDb, three friends plan to pull off a simple robbery and go on the run. But Matt, what are your general thoughts on Bottle Rocket?
General thoughts is I really enjoyed it. I like how simple it is. It's just kind of low stakes fun, just following these guys around, just their interactions with each other is really kind of what drives the movie forward. You know, I didn't realize till after that it was the Wilson brothers' debut. So I thought that was really cool. I liked seeing
Yes.
them like young versions of them. It was interesting to see that. I tend to actually like Wes Anderson's earlier stuff a little bit more. I'm a big fan of Rushmore. I wasn't really the biggest fan of Wes Anderson in general. I know he's a lot of people's favorites,
Mhm.
but a lot of his movies, like, not to get too off topic, but his more current movies, at points it feels like you're like looking at a painting or something, or like going to a museum, compared to his earlier stuff is like more, it feels like a movie. It feels like a real movie. And that's
Which
why I kind of appreciate this more in a way.
I think there's a distinct moment, this distinct film where the page kind of turned on this, where he started going really into the, I feel like I'm in a completely different universe. And there's close shades of that in the Royal Tenenbaums, but I really feel like Life Aquatic is that
Hmm.
point where like he hit a point where it's just like, I'm going weird. And
Yeah.
he has a very distinct visual palette and very idiosyncratic. And he's one of those kinds of directors where, like, I don't think there's a lot of people who are like, Wes Anderson's fine. It's just like, I love Wes Anderson, or he is the worst. And I have some friends who absolutely hate Wes Anderson, Paige, which is why she is going to be on the episode for the shortest film that he has, one of his short films, because she did not want to come on to any of the other episodes. But I'm a huge fan of his, and I appreciate the artistic leaps that he's been doing. But certainly his very most recent films have gotten very isolating. I feel like for a lot of mainstream audiences, because like if you watch The French Dispatch or Asteroid City, they are there. They're in a
Yeah.
completely different place. And this feels like you feel that style building, you see the shades of it. But yes, this does feel like a very grounded indie kind of authentic experience. And like sure, there's like very specific colors and stuff like that that pop, reds very rich in this film and stuff like that. But it does feel like this is a bunch of guys who put together a really well made indie film. It feels a little gritty and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And it still has some of those moments with like the them trying out the guns. Definitely feels like a very Wes Anderson moment. And they're all like
Yeah, yeah.
like that side shot and everything. And I think there's one particular chase in this towards the very end on foot through this whole entire facility that feels very Wes Anderson, but it's a lot of fun. And this film really rises on the obviously built-in chemistry that Owen and Luke Wilson have, because like obviously they've known each other their whole lives. And they just have this great rapport. And it's all from like the opening scene with the breakout from the
Yeah.
facility. That's hilarious and really sets the tone for this movie where Wilson thinks he's breaking out Luke Wilson from this facility, and Bingham's just so hyped up to do this. And Anthony's a good friend. He's just like, come on, man. Can you just let me out through the window? He's just like sitting there with his binoculars. It's a
Yeah.
fun way to introduce this, and immediately you understand their dynamic and everything.
Yeah, I really like that kind of naivety in
Mhm.
Owen Wilson's character,
Yep.
where he's just kind of like I don't even know how to describe it, but he's kind of like in his own world in a way,
Yep.
and it's just very funny. Like the situations that he gets himself in, and it leads to very funny instances of humor.
Mhm.
Like when he starts being nice to the people when he's robbing them, stuff like that. That was one of probably my favorite parts of the film.
It's very interesting because Dignan is somebody who he is an ideas guy. And I feel like a lot of people probably have had a friend like that at some point who is just like they're the schemer of the group and they always
Yeah,
have schemes and stuff like that. And like, they're your friend and you're kind of like, that's kind of dumb. But go along with it. And like Owen Wilson really captures that. And he has that like manic energy of like, I'm the cool one. But he's really not.
yeah,
and but he's so sure that he is, and Owen Wilson plays that so well in so many different roles, and it works so well because Luke Wilson is very much like the that kind of very empathetic lead in a film that like he's just a good guy and
hmm
we can get behind him, and it makes sense that like hey, he meets this really nice girl and he falls in love with, and like that whole entire sequence at the motel was charming, and I did really like their dynamic, and obviously Digna just like we can't have this because like it's getting in the way of my scheme,
yeah,
and like that whole dynamic is a lot of fun for sure.
yeah. I really that reminds me of the scene where I guess it's kind of like a whole plot point was that
Mhm.
um Dignan's getting I forget who it is. I forget the character's name, but he's translating and says like, "Oh, tell him that I love him." And he's like, "All
Yeah.
right, like why would I tell him that?" But I guess like it just shows that just perfectly exemplifies how he is as a character. And that's kind of like what stops Luke Wilson's character from pursuing her. So,
Well, and that's the like manipulation of Dignan too, because like not only is he that schemer friend, but he's also that friend like they probably pissed you off a few too many times in your relationship, but like there's just something about like you've been friends for so long that like you'll get over it eventually, but like you
yeah.
might not talk to them for a while because they did that thing. That's that thing, and he did it, and like they get in that altercation with each other over it, and them finally reconnecting because obviously like we build up into this third act of this film where it's like it's a heist film, and it's so iconic like them all in like the yellow jumpsuits and everything, and it's just so visually specific, and how of course it didn't work out because Dignan's not really that smart of a person, and he got played for sure. And like that whole entire sequence is fun, it's awkward, it's it's suspenseful too because like oh my god, are they actually gonna like get out of this because everything just starts going sideways,
Yeah.
and you have those emotional moments where it's just like who would actually be the hero in the moment? Luke Wilson's character, but who's too egotistical to give up an opportunity to get the attention on them? Wilson's character. So, like that whole entire exchange too really has that weight, and you might step back and think about like why are they friends? But like we see throughout this whole entire film really why they're friends, and you know, they might not always get along, or maybe Dignam doesn't deserve a friend like Anthony a lot of the time, but they seem to be able to find ways to make their friendship work.
Yeah. And speaking about that, the kind of the last act, the last
Yeah.
heist, I just love how quickly it just goes into complete madness. And
Yep.
that's kind of like where you really see Wes Anderson's style of humor like really shine in those last
Mm.
scenes. And there is something, I don't want to say like dark, but it's not like all fun and games. Like they have guns and they're holding people
Yeah.
hostage. Like you see that at one point they I forget what happens, but they're messing around and the gun goes off and he almost shoots his partner and like you realize like wait a second, this is these guys are actually like, you know, they're actual criminals.
Yes. Well, and I think what's so interesting is that Wes Anderson does have a dark edge to him, and he hides it in really like pastel colors and stuff like that. But like in every single one of his films, there's something dark going on. And this has those moments. It's like, if you really think about it, it's like, this is like, you have a friend who keeps stabbing one friend in the back, keeps screwing him over. And also, not gonna lie, which I think it's an interesting thing to think about is like, was Anthony, should he have been selfish in that moment, and like
Hmm.
actually like pursued a relationship because like Dignam just keeps getting him in trouble. And like he might actually find something nice, but like they're both being selfish in their own way. And like, yeah, this leads up to a heist where like people could have got shot,
Yeah.
people got arrested, went to prison. So like there's some moments like this, and you always have those moments sprinkled throughout his films. And like my favorite's the Grand Budapest Hotel, and I can't wait to do that episode. But like there's murder multiple times throughout that movie. And just like, oh, like this is funny and quirky, but also people are dying.
Yeah.
Like it comes up on you that way. And yeah, this is such a well crafted, lean, energetic kind of heist film with a lot of heart to it. And like I can see why somebody like Martin Scorsese really appreciated this because this is like that very raw, authentic, grassroots kind of filmmaking that like this feels a little bit like a 70s flick might be. And I can see why like that brought him back to like his early career and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a great debut for sure. And like you said, there's just like the hints of what we'll see down the line in his career. But
Mhm.
obviously, this was made on a small budget. I actually saw that it didn't. I was reading a little bit, doing some research, and apparently it bombed. Didn't do well at the box office.
Yes,
So,
financially this did not do well, but it got enough attention obviously critically for people to be like, "Oh, I really noticed this filmmaker," and like he got a $10 million budget for Rushmore, which was a modest success, but like to be frank, I don't think a whole lot of Wes Anderson movies make a ton of money. So like
yeah, yeah.
they're like not those kinds of films. And I think it's hard sometimes to take a step back and think about like this is such a successful filmmaker. It's like, well, artistically, they've accomplished a lot of things, but like these movies don't make a ton of money. But I think this film would have found probably like a niche today.
Hmm.
I well, unfortunately, I feel like this probably would have wound up on a streaming service
Yeah,
if it was
probably.
released today. But like this is one of those kind of like little indie flicks. I'm a little surprised this didn't find like that niche and made a like a nice chunk of money. Because yeah, this is not an expensive film. Like you can tell this was shot like on location in like small like isolated places. Like the whole entire climax of this movie looks like it's in an abandoned warehouse. So
Yeah,
like they probably didn't have to spend a lot of money to be able to shoot that whole entire sequence. And the only like relatively big name at the time that they got was James Caan, who at that point in his career definitely wasn't like selling movies anymore.
yeah. No, I was gonna bring that up. I was surprised when he appeared in the movie because I was like, this is such a low budget.
Yeah.
Like, how did they get him to be in this? But
Well, and I'm guessing like it was at that point in his career, like he did probably didn't have a whole lot of like big roles. Because like it was only a few years before this he had Misery, which is crazy.
yeah, yeah,
Obviously Kathy Bates got a lot more of the attention for Misery than James Caan did, but like James Caan was like the one who sold that movie name wise because like it's Sonny from The Godfather.
yeah,
And like in the 70s, he was a really big deal. And like what was it? Probably like 7 years after this was when Elf came out. He finally was like in a big box office kind of film like that.
yeah,
Um, but he's so weird. Like he's in a
yeah,
kimono and like a samurai sword. Like I would 100% see Bill Murray in such a weird ass like tiny role like this. it was kind of weird seeing James Caan in a kind of role like this because like he's that like classic Hollywood tough guy. I also think it's funny that Andrew Wilson also popped up in this, and you know he's a Wilson brother the second he opens his mouth, and he sounds exactly like his two brothers.
Yeah, I read that, but I honestly don't remember. I must have like blinked or something. I don't remember seeing him in it.
He was the blonde jerk guy, I believe, that came
Oh,
up to them at the table.
he
And
was one of the bullies.
yeah, and like when he opens his mouth and you hear him talk, it's just like if
Wait a
you close
second.
your eyes, I'm like, is that Luke Wilson?
Yeah.
Because like I also rewatched Rushmore for that episode. And he pops up in that too. I'm like, oh my god, they all sound exactly the same. It's just Owen Wilson has a little bit more of a wow
Yeah, yeah.
in his
I think
voice.
this was his first wow was in this movie, apparently.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
It all began here, man. It all began here. Just wowing all over the place. But I guess was there anything else that really stood out to you? Any particular scenes or characters that stood out to you in the film?
I think the scene that really stuck out to me was that initial bank heist, not bank heist, when they rob like the library.
Yeah,
Just because it kind of shows like how unserious they are as a trio of robbers that they
yep,
can't even keep up their act and they start being nice to the people and the scene where just the small interaction where he's like, "All right, do you have some bags for like
yeah,
dictionaries or stuff like that?" And just it I don't know, I just love that scene. I love the style of humor. I love that kind of dry humor
mhm.
and I like how Wes Anderson makes movies that I don't want to say they're like satirical, but they're not meant to be taken like serious. They're not meant to be like, okay, this is real life. This is something that would happen in our reality. Because I mean, I'm sure people like this probably do exist, but it's not
Well,
something that you would see every day.
well, and I think an interesting thing is he always intended on crafting a heightened reality to his films, and obviously he's perfected what he means by that at this point.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that he always wanted to base it off of Roald Dahl books, which is also why he is damn good at adapting Roald Dahl books into things between Fantastic Mr. Fox and those four shorts that he made for
Yeah, yeah.
Netflix. But like this film, it's like who would rob for books? Like who would do that? And
Yeah.
you would do that in a Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
And there's always a zaniness and a silliness to it. But there's always like a good heart to it. And there's always some kind of emotion and meaning to it too. But I appreciate that he doesn't take himself as a craftsman too seriously and always finds ways to make things. There's a lighter edge to things, even when he's dealing with something darker. It's not quite like I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan, and they're
Hmm.
always able to find like the funny moments in like the darkest things. But like Wes Anderson, it's more of like, yes, there's very real human elements to this. It's just the whole entire package that he puts it in is so strange and offbeat and weird. And, you know, this whole entire thing where it's like, yes, have we been in a moment where it's like we had that crush and really fell hard for somebody? It's like that's a very relatable human thing, like
Yeah.
having that kind of connection. But would it all any of us go like trying to rob like a bookstore and stuff like that? It's like he's able to balance those things really well. And this film is such a charming little film and has so many wonderful moments. And I can definitely see why, yeah, this might not have made money, but it definitely got people's attention.
Yeah, definitely. This is my first time watching it, so it was a good excuse for me to finally get to it. I'd seen Rushmore, which I was a big fan of already, but
Mhm.
I think this kind of like solidified that I definitely prefer earlier Wes Anderson work compared to his newer stuff.
Well, and I definitely think there's been people that have kind of gotten off the train, at least with especially his last few films. I truly believe, and I was a little worried about this. Grand Budapest Hotel, I feel like felt like the perfect version of like what he tries to do,
Yeah,
balancing all these different kinds of things. And
that's
now,
definitely my favorite movie of his.
Mhm. And now he's taking some wild swings, and they're not all going to land. And
Yeah.
like I think I'm still processing Asteroid City at this point. And I
I
seen it
liked
a
Asteroid
couple
City
times.
actually.
Mhm. And but like that is so idiosyncratic and specific in because like those trailers did not do that film justice on like what's really going on because like obviously it captured like all the fun little things, but it's nice seeing him playing in a simple sandbox like this
Yeah.
and being able to bring his personality and charm. And like this is well before he started having like films with 50 named actors in them. And this really rested on the energy of the Wilson brothers. And it was such a great showcase for the two of them. And they both played their roles so perfectly.
Yeah, and I always like seeing a story like this where it's just kind of how this group of talent sort of got their start because
Mm.
it's just interesting to think about that, like how many directors or actors are just out there waiting to be discovered. So it's cool to kind of look at this in hindsight, knowing what we know now.
Well, what's crazy is apparently Owen Wilson, after this bombed, considered going into the military,
Really,
which
that's crazy.
so weird.
Who would have
Well, and
voiced
like
Lightning McQueen?
would have found somebody, but like it's crazy that like Owen Wilson has gone on to do so many. Like if you grew up watching movies in the late '90s into like the 2000s, stuff, Owen Wilson was everywhere.
Yeah,
And whether it's in Vince Vaughn comedies or Wes Anderson films, or like hell, I remember him like watching Armageddon for the first time, and like him and Ben Affleck arguing over it's like I would be Han, and I think you'd be Chewie. It's like Chewbacca. Have you even watched Star Wars? Like Owen Wilson didn't even have a very big role in that, but like made an impact. And obviously, Luke Wilson got to star in Idiocracy, the prequel to Real Life Today, that we're living in. But like where Luke Wilson plays the most average man in the world. And it's so much fun seeing where both of their careers have gone for sure. But yeah, I guess Matt, do you have any final thoughts on Bottle Rocket?
I feel like we pretty much touched everything we wanted to. It is a very simple film, you know.
Mm.
There's not like too much to really like digest here. It's just fun. It's simple plot and just, it's enjoyable film.
And it has a nice little crush, and it's about friendship. So
Yeah.
it has some nice themes in there. But let's get to some recommendations to send you all away with. But Matt, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
So I recently had this film recommended to me, and I believe it's from 2022. It's the film The Worst Person in the World,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically about just navigating through relationships and getting older. And it just really affected me in a profound way for some reason when I watched it. I guess because, I'm 23. I turned 24 in like 2 weeks. So I'm sort of at that age where I'm like, okay, I'm kind of becoming an adult now. I have to, figure out what I want to do with my life. What are my big goals I want to focus on, whether it's work, relationships, whatever. So I just feel like I watched that film at a good time, and I read a quote about it that was like the the sad thing about life is like it only makes sense in reverse, but you're forced to live it forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's just such a profound statement, and that really like describes the film. And yeah, it was just I don't know, it was a great watch if you want to get existential, so you could toss that on. So
Like you have so many different kinds of expectations from the title of this movie, and it's like, how bad can she be? But it's not really what it's about.
yeah.
It's about us navigating life. And sometimes we think we're the worst person in the world and struggling with that. And Joaquin Trier, I love this film and his film Thelma that came out in 2017. One of the most random movie going experiences. I'm like, I want to see a movie, and there's this random film that I've never heard of, foreign language film. and it's like this strange like mental health allegory, but also like a superhero story with superpowers, and it's like in that strange like how does he even get made? Like what is this? He's such an interesting filmmaker, and Renat Rensve, who stars in this, she has a new film coming out, Armand, coming out. I think it's releasing in February.
She was in A Different Man too, right?
Was she?
I think she was the lead, the well, not the lead, but
Yep,
the
she
lead
was also in
actress.
that.
She was really good
She's
in
having
that.
a moment,
Yeah.
picking up some uh big performances. I didn't even, I didn't even recognize her. I hadn't watched this in a while, and I went through that whole entire film and didn't realize that was the same actor. But kind of distracted with some Sebastian Stan, for sure. But she's a really fantastic performer, and she does such a great job in this film. And what did this lose to? Did this get?
Perform was it like Drive My Car or something? Was that it?
I think it was.
I think yeah.
So this was, I think this also got nominated for screenplay because like it is a really interesting, well written film as well. But I appreciated that recommendation, and I know I mentioned this before we started recording. This is a really cool Criterion cover too. So you made it if you got a Criterion collection release. So there you go.
Yep. Yep.
You know it's fine cinema when you get your Criterion release. My new film that I wanted to recommend is also a foreign language film, international film, which I was very disappointed that this didn't win at the Golden Globes. Was The Seed of a Sacred Fig. So this was a film shot secretly in Iran because there was no way in hell the Iranian government was going to approve this film because it's a big indictment on the very authoritarian regime that's in the country. But it has such humongous ideas, but then it distills it into this very powerful and intense family drama. Um, it is like be warned, this is a whole 3 hours. It's so funny because I was either going to choose this or The Count of Monte Cristo, also foreign language film, also a whole 3 hours. So just be prepared if you're going to go to the theater to watch either of those movies. You're going to be there for a while. But like this film was intense and made me feel so uncomfortable at times. Did you get a chance to check this out?
I actually haven't. I've heard some buzz about it. I haven't really seen any of the foreign language films from this year, aside from Amelia Perez, which not a big fan of, but
Which that one was like delivered to us on a platter on Netflix.
yeah.
So it was
No,
like right there.
I heard the name like Seed of a Sacred Fig before, and I remember I forget when I was like looking at stuff in theaters, I just saw it and I was like, all right. I didn't know it would be like Oscar buzz kind of film, so I didn't
I
really
got
look into it.
I got very excited because like the third act of this film is it's something special when it finally builds up to that fever pitch. And I drove into Philly to go see this because that was like the only place showing it. I'm like, well, we're gonna take an adventure.
Yeah.
Um Tolls and you got tolls and parking and stuff like that. I'm like, it was worth it. So there you go. Now, one film that I watched off my watch list because I've become a humongous Powell and Pressburger fan. Quick side recommendation: there's a documentary called Made in England about their filmography, and it's basically a film analysis documentary with Martin Scorsese, who's like their biggest fan. And Michael Powell later in his career made this thriller called Peeping Tom. And if you watch this movie, you'll be like, oh, this is Taxi Driver. This is where Scorsese like channeled a lot of his vision and his ideas for that film. And this is definitely the kind of film where it's like, wow, this is where Scorsese fell in love with really detestable protagonists that really challenge you like them. And it's about this photographer who turns out to be a serial killer who has gone through like generational trauma and has put him in a horrible mental state. And he winds up doing these like photographer homicide. Um, and this is a gorgeous film, an absolutely incredibly shot film, and it's so interesting. It's not like the kind of film that you just like casually recommend to people. It's definitely like if you love film, this is something really worth checking out. It's on the Criterion channel right now. That's how you know this
That's
is
how you
your
know. Yep.
cinephiles. um, I'm a card carrying charter member of the Criterion channel. I got my subscription to that. But no, this is such a fascinating and interesting film. And if you're a big Scorsese fan, you'll see those fingerprints all over it for sure. And obviously, those three recommendations are very like art house kind of recommendations. Time to shake things up. And my last recommendation, rewatching one of my movies, is Doctor No, that original James Bond movie, which I've been watching James Bond movies since I was like, I don't know, 7. So I'm a big James Bond fan, and rewatching this was a lot of fun. This is where all the tropes started. And
Yeah,
you could
yeah,
see them all there, even from like this didn't even have like an original Bond theme. It was the theme, the da da da, and
yeah,
that was
yeah,
like that's what the opening credits are. Sean Connery was something else, and like Doctor No was a villain, the Nehru jacket, the metal hands, and everything. It's just like this is James Bond. Like if you needed to describe what James Bond is, this is it.
yeah.
So it was a
The
nice
s- the
rewatch.
uh the sexism, all that.
Yes, the James. Just a reminder, everybody: James Bond is not a good person. One, he murders people. Two, he womanizes a lot. And
It's
Sean
funny.
Connery,
It's funny going back to those original films because that's just kind of how things were. Like no one questioned stuff like that back then. It's
like Sean Connery in an interview was straight up like, sometimes you just have to smack a woman.
yeah,
And it's just like, oh man. He was a man of the 60s. Like, and that's the thing, because like if you read any of the original James Bond novels, like he's a piece of shit. Like he's not a good person. He's a cold-blooded killer. Obviously, like the James Bond films made him cool.
yeah.
And that's what has stuck around for generations.
Yeah, I
And
mean, he's still a great action hero.
yeah,
He does a lot of questionable things that I wouldn't agree with or do myself, but I could still appreciate the action, you know?
well, and he gets the job done.
Yeah.
Taking down Spectre one person at a time. So there you go. But no, I have my whole Bond collection
Oh,
Blu-ray
you
over
do?
there. Yeah, I got
That's
that
nice.
like that white Bond Blu-ray collection. I used to have all of them on VHS as a
Oh,
kid
wow.
growing up. So oh, Bond month always used to be in November, and that's my birthday month, and I would watch so many James movies. Uh, should a kid at 7 years old be binge watching James Bond movies? Probably not. But you know what? I grew up to being a functioning member of society, so I think it worked out fine.
Yeah, you
So there
made
you
it,
go.
so.
We made it work. But Matt, thank you so much for coming on and chatting movies with me.
Yeah, man, the pleasure's mine. Invite me back whenever. I love talking film with you. It's fun. So,
Awesome. We'll talk about that. But
yeah.
thank all of you out there. And thank you for wearing the wearing through the 80 film journey of John Ford. And now we're shaking things up for something very different with some Wes Anderson. And we're just getting started. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.